Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome poet, artist, voice of human values, Mr. Dee Allen. Mr. Allen, welcome, sir.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Spisak.
Well, please call me Rick throughout. We've known each other's work for some time. I have a tremendous appreciation for your voice and the humane values you speak to. You do work of such power, speaking to historic things that have gone on and of the status of things that we live in and try to make better today. Um, Mr. Allen, let me ask you first. Some of us start scribbling when we're young and we kind of get the idea that we're artists. Others, it comes to later, especially when some prompt happens in our lives. Tell us about yourself, sir. Were you one of those little kids sitting there scribbling, drawing, writing? Talk about young Mr. Allen.
Guilty as charged. I was definitely one of those youngsters who was sitting at home with a piece of paper and a pencil in front of me, just drawing whatever was in my immediate environment or in my imagination. But before I learned how to draw or anything like that, I first approached the written word and fell in love with it as early as age 4.
Excellent, excellent.
As early as age 4, I, I learned how to read. Before I could graduate to books, I started learning how to read and the fundamentals of the English language by reading road signs, if you could believe that.
I do, sir. I do indeed. My mom used to tell stories about me reading the ketchup bottles and ingredients on the dining room table. So yeah, I completely appreciate that.
I used to
Um,
do the same thing.
Not surprised, my brother. Not surprised. Your felicity of language is is amazing and beautiful. Okay,
Thank you.
so let's go on. Here you are, you're a young lad, you're captured by the word, you're writing, you're drawing. Um, did some of us, like I said, kind of feel the calling when we're young. Did you know you were an artist when you were just a young school lad?
Yeah, I knew I had some kind of creative ability in me to be able to communicate with people, whether it was through a drawing on paper or just writing a little story. I've always done the creative writing thing my whole life. I've always been fascinated with it. But
Wonderful.
I didn't get serious with it until I reached my early 20s, but I'll speak about that later.
Okay, okay. Going back to the kid thing, I know for me, I loved history. I got introduced to history when I was very young. I had an uncle who was an anthropologist, and he turned me on to cultural anthropology when I was still in grade school. But
You
when,
lucky.
oh, dude, I have had so many fortunate things in my life. Um, but what I was getting at is when I first heard about Egypt, and I heard about how scribes, people who had the power to write and to read, I thought that that was so true still to this day. I thought that when I could learn to write, I would be part of this ancient chain of people who took responsibility to share, to capture words and life. And it was just, it struck me as so magical. Obviously, you were the same kind of kid. Did you have a love of history when you were young also?
Oh, yeah, definitely, because history always told a great deal of the best stories. In fact, around maybe between the ages of 11 and 14, some of my favorite books to read were history books. And I read a lot of that history from my aunt and uncle's Funk and Wagnall's encyclopedia collections. Remember those?
Oh, I
People,
do indeed. I do indeed. There's nothing I liked better than to sit in front of a rack of encyclopedias and just page by page by page. One of the things that I had the good fortune to have when I was a kid is my parents would sometimes go to auctions, right? And you know where I made a beeline? I made a beeline for the box of books. and I would just go, "Oh my God, I can get a box of books for 50 cents? That's fantastic."
I had that same enthusiasm whenever my aunt or my grandmother would drag me to these garage sales. Back when I was a kid, I called them garbage sales because a lot of people would take old stuff they don't need anymore, stuff that they've written off as garbage, and sell them to the public for a cheap
Yep,
price.
yep, yep.
And they would both drag me to these yard sales or or charity shops, you name it,
Yep.
Goodwill, Salvation Army, Disabled American Veterans, you name it. I would go to those and I would make a beeline toward where they sold the books and see if there was anything that caught my eye.
Kindred spirits, my friend, kindred spirits. All right, now, this is a tough one. You can call a friend if you want. Who is the first author that made an impression on you? Whose name you said that's cool. I like that. Do you remember?
Um, the earliest writer that I could remember that made an impression on me as a small kid, knee high to a roach, was Dr. Seuss. When I wasn't reading encyclopedias, when I wasn't reading stuff that was too advanced for an ordinary kid,
Oh yeah.
when I wasn't reading any of that stuff, I would head toward Green Eggs and Ham, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish, Hop on Pop, Yertle the Turtle, Happy Birthday to Me, The Cat in the Hat, etc. I would read that and The Pokey Little Puppy, which was one of those little golden books like
Oh yeah.
any other
I know
kid.
it well. Yeah, the Zeus book that I got the most out of was The Cat in the Hat Came Back. Not the first, but the second Cat in the Hat adventure. It was just it just struck me, and I really enjoyed the drawing style too. So that contributed a lot to my freehand drawing.
Same. I used to love the drawing style and the rhyming storytelling style that Dr. Seuss often had. With you, it was The Cat in the Hat Came Back. With me, it was, believe it or not, it might not be a surprise to you, but The Lorax.
Oh,
I
wonderful!
am the Lorax. I speak for the trees.
What a
And
great
he
book!
and he would try to save the truffle trees from the Onceler chopping them all down,
Yeah.
putting them into his truck and sending them to his factory to make whatever with them until there's nothing left in the world but straight desert and stumps. And I think that might have contributed to the green thought that I have today. My
Yeah.
first inspiration for green thought was my own mother. I was 3 years old. We were visiting family in New York City. And sure enough, my mother catches me in the act of throwing down a candy wrapper on the ground. She smacks my hand, points me to a trash can, and says, "You see that? That's where you put your candy wrapper, not on the ground."
Cool. Cool. Okay. Next question. Now, here you obviously are a creative soul. You're writing, you're drawing. A lot of times, people like us don't fit real well in the school environment, and sometimes there's just a little friction there. So tell me, did you have some supportive classes, or was it a struggle? Tell me about your early school years.
Um, my folks were supportive when I was drawing something on a piece of paper. As for my classmates, a lot of them gave me shit because I didn't want to like play the same games that they played. I wanted to draw and maybe paint or something. I wanted to do something more creative. I wasn't all that athletic or anything like that.
Ah, I hear you. I hear you. I always say that when I discovered that sports and sportsmanship were two different things, I said,
And
then
they
what's the
are.
point? What's the point?
A lot of people can be very masterful at sports, but they could still do their teammates or their opponents dirty,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
regardless.
Now, in school, there are opportunities, but they're often very, very circumscribed. I know for me, when I was selected as the head of the junior high school newsletter, right? They go, "Why are you writing angry editorials? You're not supposed to write angry editorials about improving the school. You're just supposed to write how everything is just fine." So tell me, sir, did you have some writing opportunities or some drawing opportunities in school?
No, I did not. Not in the same way that you did. I never wrote for the school paper, never edited it, never wrote editorials. A lot of my writing I pretty much kept to myself, except for when the teacher required it for like English lit class, whenever she wanted to give all of us a creative writing exercise. That was the only time I was really able to express myself in that through that means.
Yeah.
As for drawing, I was never able to do that in the mixed media art class that I was placed in junior high school or high school. They had me doing other forms of art, but no straightforward drawing. I did that basically in study hall. Whenever I did my homework and I would from different classes and I would be finished with it, I would have more than enough time to just sit down and draw. And I would draw superheroes from all my favorite comic books that I read: Captain America, Spider-Man, Conan the Barbarian, Black Panther, Iron Man, you name it.
Well, I completely understand. I
And
I tried I tried to fit into art classes and stuff like that, but what I had my art experience was very difficult. My teachers didn't particularly care for my style, and I was okay with that. I thought, you don't like what I'm doing, that's fine. I had actually one of the things that did not come easily to me as an artist was portraiture. I was never really that focused on portraiture,
me
but
either.
I tried and tried and tried and tried and tried and thought, look, I think of myself as a pretty good artist, but it took me probably 2 years of regular practice to actually get what I considered a photorealistic drawing of my own head, right? So I take it very proud to my teacher and say, man, look at this. Finally, after years of trying, I finally got a photorealistic drawing of my head. And my my teacher, a psychologist, but he was the guy I was closest to, says to me, "Well, Richard, this is very interesting." And I thought, "Oh, bullshit fucking answer. Interesting?
This
That's your
is
take?"
interesting.
And then he
That's
goes,
a
then
that's
he
another
says,
way of basically saying this is a weird piece of shit. What possessed him to make this?
"Well," then he goes, "Well, I guess this shows that you're schizophrenic." And I said,
Oh,
"What the hell?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, well, see, that's okay though, because all artists are schizophrenic." And I said, "Listen, I'm not going to tell you your business, but it seems to me that schizophrenic is a diagnosis of inability to understand oneself, and that one establishes kind of a dichotomy: I'm this, I'm that. But this is just a portrait. It's you know god damn. But anyway, that was him. So listen, when did you first start getting some opportunities to really stand up and say, by God, I'm an artist? Was it in some social activity? Was it, obviously it was out of school? Where did you start to really feel like you're setting your teeth in this stuff?
hmm. That's kind of a tough one. And I'm going to
Okay.
have to search all of my memory for that particular one crucial event that made me realize that I was an artist. I always knew I was an artist, but my art teachers may have not have realized it. They had me doing pottery. They had me doing silk screen stencils. They had me doing wood cutting, anything but straightforward drawing.
Yeah.
And when I showed them my drawing, they thought it was crap because it was so low brow. It wasn't highbrow stuff. It was for people who were dumb to them, I guess. And what I did at that time was comic book style drawing of
Yeah.
men, women, animals, buildings, you name it. That
Okay.
was the
Now let me
level
ask
of
you this.
where I worked at.
You and I have lived in like that old Chinese curse, interesting times. As as our society begins to make efforts to understand our common humanity, there was some very tricky social stuff. It still goes on, sadly. And did you find yourself part of, using some of your art for should we say political or societal purposes, like, doing posters for a rally or stuff like that?
I wasn't at that level yet, but I was aware that I was part of a group of people that were at the bottom rung of the socioeconomic ladder. When I was 13 years old, one night I left home and decided to go to a convenience store nearby just to buy a 2 liter bottle of 7 Up in a plastic bottle. Long story short, I leave the convenience store with a paper bag with this green 2 liter bottle of 7 Up, and I'm trying to make it back home, but I use the same suburban neighborhood that I use in the daytime as a shortcut to get back home. I'm walking through this suburban neighborhood, and all of a sudden, slowly driving up beside me was a cop car. And sure enough, there was this white, heavyset, mustachioed redneck cop who rolls down his window of his cop car and says, "Hey, boy, what you doing in this neighborhood here? You ain't supposed to be around here. Let's see your ID." And of course, I didn't have any ID. I was 13 years old. I was a kid. And what was I supposed to whip out for this redneck cop? And he lets me off with a warning. He's like, "I do not ever want to see you in this neighborhood again, boy." That word boy, the racist connotations that came with that word. When I think
Yeah.
of the word boy, I immediately think slavery. I think plantations. I
Yeah.
think 19th century bullshit before the Civil War and Reconstruction. And that was my first real brush with police harassment.
Yeah.
But that still went on years after that incident, either at night or in the case of a couple of times in my young adult life in broad daylight. One on the way to work and one at work. When my restaurant job was closed and I was waiting for the boss to open it up, 3 squad cars circled around me, and they saw me and thought that I was looking to break into the place because I had black clothes and I had this tote bag with my name on it. And they thought the worst of me. And after they frisked me down and I gave them my explanation, and they pried into my bag without my permission, and only saw that there was an open face writing pad and a pen and a bottle of water, they were like, "He's clean." They didn't say "I'm sorry" or let me off with a warning or anything. They just left. And that incident traumatized me for a little bit. But it led to a noontime nap where I went back home. I never got to work that day. And I had this dream, not really a dream, but a long protracted flashback of that same event replaying itself. And I woke up and I realized if I don't do something about this, I'm going to have this same event replaying in my head for the rest of my life. And it's going to leave me shaking. So I wrote a poem about it. And 6 days later, I performed it at a local nightclub, packed to the gills with 300 people, opening up for punk bands.
Cool.
And when I read that poem, everybody was on my side. They were cheering me on, and they were all yelling, "Fuck the cops, fuck the police." And that was probably one period that I can remember, the earliest, where I could use my work toward activism.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was a teenager, it was during the Vietnam War. And many of us thought that this was not just wrong, not just evil standard war bullshit, but was also racist. And that racism was being used not just against the Vietnamese, but against American citizens as well. And there was a time of solidarity. It was really remarkable. Um, and I took to the streets and I made speeches with my poetry, with my anti-war cartoons and stuff like that, and it helped me understand that the power of the word, the power of the poem, the power of the speech, power of the cartoon had the ability to change people's thinking, and that gave me a lot of hope. Um, but one of the things that I grew up with, and I was fortunate for this, that I grew up in the lower working class industrial North. And my family was almost all working in the industrial factories of Pittsburgh. And there was a profound racial and cultural set of status depending on where you were. And my heritage is Eastern European. I'm Slovak, and the Slovaks and Hungarians were just barely above African Americans, and the Italians were down below them as well. And
And
so
I am both.
wow. Well, I would say to people, look, this stratification works to hurt everybody. It's not just this group or that group, and to use the vulgarisms for this or for that. It's just stupid. You're playing their game, you know?
Yeah, it's simple. It's an old, simple strategy of divide and conquer. And it's worked for bosses, it's worked for business owners, it's worked for politicians and dictators over and over throughout recorded history. And it's definitely worked against the working class, which your background and my background are.
Yeah, yeah. But we'll talk poetry in just a minute. Did you get a chance to what was your did you have college experiences? What was that like?
Yeah, I had college experiences, but I didn't really start going to college until I was 34 years old. And that was because two now ex housemates had talked me into that. And they thought that I was too smart to be staying out of school for so long. And that can even make a little bit of money straight from the government in the form of the federal Pell Grant just to go to school and train for whatever I wanted. For a short while, I was an undeclared student, but you can only do that for so long. And then I had to really think about what interested me in this life. And what interested me is the ongoing power struggle between the haves and the have-nots. Who have the who has privilege, who does not, who benefits from that privilege, who does not. who has the most power on a social or political scale and who does not. And that made the decision to register as in my college as a political science major easy.
Cool.
And the first 4 years of college, my classes were a cakewalk. And then the last 2 years, I started doing bullshit gen ed classes just to get by, just to make sure that all my grades are transferable to another higher learning institution. I dropped out after having to deal with the math part of it, and I've never had much of a head for combining letters, numbers, or trying to figure out equations or algebraic expressions and whatnot. I was never good at that. But English was where my greatest strength was. And whenever I wasn't doing political science classes, I would excel in English classes and labor studies and ethnic studies and all those interdisciplinary courses that define any categorization. And I started building up my skill set from that, or what my old Black economics professor, John Whitehead, would call intellectual capital.
Very good. Very good. Absolutely.
And I decided to put that intellectual capital into whatever I was writing at the time. But before I started writing creatively again, I went through this long 7-year bout with writer's block. And that 7 years bout of writer's block was brought on in the winter of 2000 when I was working on this one poem. It had this amazing, hella good opening line. But then I tried to write other lines to try to match it. And the more I kept writing, the more I started to realize I was forcing out this creation of mine.
Yeah.
And then when I picked up this poem to proofread it, and I realized I have written the worst poem ever. The biggest hunk of shit I have ever created. Bigger than anything that would slide straight out of the rear end. And I decided, not just decided, but I flew into a rage. I was so damn mad at myself that I destroyed this one poem, threw it in the trash can, and then threw right behind it exactly 6 ring binders full of writing. 5 of them had poetry, and one big one had song lyrics. In those days, I separated the two. I took all those 6 binders and threw them in a trash can right behind that one abortive poem. It was the dumbest move I have ever made out of a fit of rage.
Yeah.
And for long years after that, 7 long years, I felt sorry for myself.
Yeah. Well, luckily, brother, you've earned your pen back in diamond mode, man. Diamond
Yeah,
mode.
it was a college English class doing homework for it that inspired me to get back into the groove of writing. I was sitting in the library one day doing homework for my English 96 class, and I was told to read by my instructor from the textbook that he'd given me, Martin Luther King's famous 1963 essay, Letter from Birmingham Jail.
Wow.
I read that from start to finish and had to do a book report on it.
Wow.
With all the details from what I've read in it. And as I was writing this book report, after having read all that, all of a sudden I felt the itch to want to write something else right after the book report. And I started writing this poem. And it turned out to be basically this political piece against all authority figures, cops, preachers, bosses at people's jobs, you name it. It was called Loyal to None. And that was the poem that broke 7 years of writer's block. And it's
Wow.
going to, and that poem is going to be the first poem in an upcoming book of mine that's being now in the production stages with a San Francisco publisher called I Publish You.
Excellent. Excellent. Dane's piece. Dane's publishing company.
Yeah, Dane, I thank him for giving this old Black Italian man's work a chance. And he's helping me put this book together
Good.
and
Good.
doing some of the marketing for it.
Good. Good.
And it will be my ninth book. Meanwhile, I have an eighth manuscript in the works as well. And there's like two publishing companies that were interested in it. One here in the San Francisco Bay Area in Half Moon Bay, California, and the other one is based in London, England. South London Poetry Books and Higawa Publishing.
Excellent.
Both
Excellent.
of them are interested, but I think I'm leaning more toward Higawa. Right now, I'm playing the waiting game with Higawa just to see what they're going to do with my manuscript. Until then, I'm going to try to piece together my ninth book with I Publish You.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, Dane's a good man. Dane's a good man. We've sort of talked a bit about your young life. Is there anything else we should know about young Dee before we move on?
About young Dee.
Yeah.
I'm going to come out and confess to you right now
Go ahead. Go ahead.
that before I made the transition to, before my creative writing transition toward poetry, I wrote primarily song lyrics, if you could
Oh,
believe that.
sure.
Starting in 1988, I was involved in several heavy metal bands that never made it past the garage. So I sang, I wrote lyrics, and I pretty much created like band logos of different kinds.
Uh-huh.
So that's where the artist in me came out. The reason why the bands never made it past the garage was because for each band, the musicians I worked with had different visions on the musical approach. My bandmates were more influenced with major record labels / commercial heavy metal, like Guns N' Roses, LA Guns, Poison, Cinderella, Skid Row, Metallica, or Whoop de Whoop, while I was more into harder underground heavy metal. So I failed as a musician. Then the McCook brothers, my friends at the time, noticed that I wrote song lyrics and talked me into writing poetry for their girlfriends. So there was a time where I played Cyrano de Bergerac.
There you go, man. There you go.
Thankfully, I didn't save those first attempts at poetry because I didn't know how to express myself through that form of writing. Besides, my early works were terrible. By midnight,
women for him?
I didn't get any women out of it at all.
No, I did for them.
Oh, for them? I don't know. They never reported back to me on that.
Damn.
By mid 1992, my ability to write poetry had gotten better with practice. And during that year, I went from metalhead to punk rock dude. And it was the spoken word albums of Henry Rollins from Black Flag and Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys that first drew me into performance poetry. I failed as a heavy metal singer, but I found success as a performance poet at house parties, taverns, and nightclubs opening up for bands, you name it.
Cool. I hear you. I have two funny stories about writing and my beginning.
Give them to me.
The first 4 articles I sold, right? I saw, stories about they wanted to They wanted a technical article. They wanted an article about this or that. So I sold 4 articles, right, to 4 different magazines. Every one went out of business before they put it
Oh,
in print. Now I got the checks,
oh my
right?
God.
So I could say I got this money. I'm a writer, right? But not one of them freaking saw ink. So that's part one, right? Now my part two story. This is this is pretty weird. Now I've always written science poems, political poems, and stuff like that, right? So I got off the road doing light shows, and I'm working in an engineering company. And there was one really kind of funny engineer, very unusual guy, and he loved my poetry. He thought my poetry was fantastic. So one day he says to me, "Hey Rick, dude, like, have you ever tried calling Carson?" And I go, "What, Johnny Carson?" He goes, "Yeah, man, you should do your stuff for Johnny Carson." I go, "Oh man, look, I'm a crazy poet, man. There's no way that guy's gonna want to see my stuff." So I forgot about it. Meanwhile, I'm making a living. I got 3 kids, making a living. Well, the son of a gun walks into my office one day and he goes, "Dude, look at this," and he's waving a sheet of paper in my face. I go, "Fucking what?" He had actually written to Carson and
Oh my
sent
God.
him, wait do you hear this? He sent him my poetry.
Really? The Johnny Carson.
The Johnny Carson.
That corny motherfucker.
So there's a phone number. He says, call this guy and ask for Frank or some stuff. So I'm like, no, dude, no, look, this is not what I'm not that's not what I do. He's like, now, God damn it, man, I put this together. Freaking call him. So I call this guy, and I'm
Oh my
sitting in the
God.
engineering lab in front of all these computers that I'm managing, and I call the Carson show, and the guy says, "Man, listen, we really like your stuff." And I go, "Really? You mean you like my poetry? Are you kidding me?" He goes, "So listen, here's the thing. What we'd like you to do is come on, and we'll throw things at you, we'll throw ideas at you, and you just write a poem right there on the air." And I go, "Wait a minute, that's not what I do. I'm not a fucking performing monkey. You
Yeah,
know,
you're not on David Letterman doing stupid human tricks, all right?
yeah, yeah." I said, I write poetry. Now, if you like my poetry, have me read some poetry. I'm happy to do that. I'd be glad to do that. And they go, "No, no, no. What we want you to do is," I go, "No, no, I'm not interested. Thanks, bye." And the engineer who set this up is like, "Man, you turned down Carson? What are you, crazy?" And I go, "Look, I don't write for fame, okay? I'm not writing to be a millionaire. I'm not writing to be a famous jackass. I'm a fucking poet. And if I can do poetry, fine, but I'm not going to just get there and go, I mean, look, you and I both know any fool could write free verse off the top of their friggin' head. No big deal. I mean, we probably even rhyme some of it. But that's not what I do. I don't do that."
I don't write to try to impress the likes of Ed McMahon or whatnot either. But fuck it, he's dead. So what does it matter?
Right. Anyway, enough of that. Now, young Mr. Allen has found his footing, got over the writer's block. He's performing. Go ahead,
I have a publishing story of my own.
please, please.
I've A lot of my friends keep telling me that my work has gotten a lot better, that I've mastered this poetry thing. And then I started sending my writing out to basically any place that will basically print my work and give this black man a chance. And in December of 1992, later on, after I did my first spoken word gig at a friend's birthday party, I end up having the same piece written in my own handwriting, not altered in any way or retyped at all, but written in my own neat, super legible handwriting. And it ended up in 2 different magazines at the same time. An underground zine from Richmond, Virginia called Slow Death #2, and Flip side number 83, which is like a more national punk alternative music or culture magazine from Pasadena. Both of those at the same time. So, with my writing in its original handwritten form. And I'm like, okay, I have arrived. I can now call myself a writer.
Right.
And I started sending my work out to wherever I can, to newspapers, to newsletters, to legit literary magazines, to underground zines. And I mostly wrote for underground zines and newspapers because that's where my heart was at.
Yeah.
The underground of mainstream USA.
Right.
Because I was both spoken word man and punk rock dude at the same time. And I just kept publishing my work whenever, right up until that bout with writer's block started in 2000. And I'm sorry if I'm not the best storyteller you've ever heard, but
don't worry about it.
That's what you got from me.
Ah, you're doing great, man. Okay. Now, how about if we hear some of that right from the heart, Mr. Dee Allen poetry?
I will. We've gotten to that portion of the podcast here.
Yep.
And I've put out like at least 7 books, but the last 3 are the ones that I feel the most proudest of.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to start with my 5th book, Eloy Onichi, Poems,
Okay.
2013 to 2018, released Earth Day 2020 by Conviction to Change Publishing. And that was a breakthrough book for me. When I first finished it and put it out, I didn't think this book was going to do well at all because it's an inner city Black man writing a series of poems about the environment. Nobody's going to really care or read this. But then the coronavirus pandemic happened. The book was released in the early, scary, uncertain days of this pandemic. And all the places that I used to perform live in person all closed down. And it didn't take long for me to discover online open mics. And since I didn't have a proper book release event for Eloy Onichi, what I did was go to all these virtual open mics and perform each poem from the book, divided into 3 sections. This one comes from section 2 of the book, entitled Beauty of Nature, from page 32 and 33. This is an ode to one of the 5 elements of nature. This is called Element 5. Giant white metal pinwheels stand upon sandy brown hills near the California-Arizona border. Circular blades spin and spin, clockwise motion, generating electricity, propelled by its energy. Colorless, odorless, shapeless, still like water, spreading ripples form, dead leaves scatter themselves on the forest flow. Pollens drift from budding flowers. Branches from trees creak slightly. Leaves on bushes rustle gently. Soda can takes a scraping hike. Plastic shopping bags floats and tumbles on its cursory passing. Colorless, odorless, shapeless. On a day full of bluster, like a lonesome coyote in need of a companion, it howls. House windows rattle. Flat skin rises up, prickly goosebumps. Bare face catches the sudden chill. Litter brushed to the wayside like amassing dust. Colorless, odorless, shapeless. There's no denying an all-moving force, constant as the earth, prevalent as the sky, uncontrollable as fire, unpredictable as water, mysterious, fervid, When pondering on creation's great elements, it's left unstated, but the presence is felt, the wind. And that poem was called Element 5, My Ode to the Wind.
Very nice. Very nice.
The Japanese tend to look at five elements of nature as opposed to the North American faux elements of nature. With the Japanese, it's earth, fire, water, air, and wind. They see wind as its own independent thing, apart from the sky, whereas us Americans tend to look at it as a manifestation of the sky. And the next poem I'm about to do happens to come from my sixth book, Rusty Gallows, Passages Against Hate, released February 1st, Chinese New Year, 2022.
Excellent stuff.
And this happens to be one of two books that was released that year. Not only in the same year, but the same month and week. I had two books released on the first week of February, 2022. This was the one that came before the other. And this is a more deeply personal piece, but at the same time, it's making a little social commentary. And once I get to the end of the poem, I actually try out something that's different from my other work. You'll hear it. This is called Wine, based on actual events. One of the most annoying things I've heard of late was caught one morning whilst riding a BART subway train from Oakland to SF, San Francisco. Some lady in sunglasses boarded and took a seat 8 paces from mine, complained to a friend on a smartphone about how she couldn't wait for everything to be restored back to normal. What was considered normal before the pandemic did damage to certain races, classes, sexes, sexualities, abilities, and nationalities of people, species of animals, and this nurturing old earth herself. I don't want to return to the old ways, to methods of mayhem. I want to see change for the better after this global sickness subsides. So you want things to go back to normal, huh? Got any cheese and crackers to go with that wine? I'm glad you found that amusing.
Nice, man, nice.
That poem was called Wine, spelled W-H-I-N-E.
I suspected as much.
And that was the first time I've ever done something where I ended a poem with a pun. And I usually frown on puns because they're usually terrible. But yeah, I like where I went with that.
Please continue, brother.
And here's the second book that came out after Rusty Gallows, 5 days later, on February 5th, 2022. It's called Plans. Released through Nomadic Press, which closed its doors on February 28, 2023. They went out of business due to not selling as many books as they once did in previous years. So I'm going to miss the hell out of Nomadic Press. They put out some great, amazing poetry books. If you haven't read anything from Nomadic Press yet, try to check out their collection of books, which could still be available through Berkeley-based small press distribution. They still carry plenty of old Nomadic Press titles, including my own book, Plans.
Cool.
This one I'm also proud of as well. I consider this my anti-corporate book, just as Rusty Gallows is my anti-racist and coronavirus pandemic book. This one comes from pages 36 through 38. And this was inspired by reading another book. Have you ever heard of a political science book called The Corporation?
Yeah.
Read through it. Still proud to have it on my shelf after all these years. From pages 36 and 38 of Plans, this is called Entity. On paper, a person. In practice, many. Counterintuitive activity. The Supreme Court would be quick to give freedom from self-incrimination, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, equal protection under the law, rights, to a creature of the charter, business entity, the corporation, before defending ours. Documents laid in front of the magistrate's face makes this person so-called independent from their managers, free to never reveal their secrets, free to defend their actions in court, free to be exempt from local laws, free to show greater praise to their greenback god, free to keep head above water, ahead of the current, fucking over actual persons living across the planet. If the corporation is a person, then that person's seriously, pathologically destructive, in sore need of a mental health professional, because only the greedy and insane would conceive someone without a long, sweaty fuck, born from thin air, weaned on aggression, schooled in supply and demand, raised without integrity, grown up, business-minded, inflicting their damage down the food chain. Formless and ruthless entity that lives, on paper, a person, in practice, many.
Bravo.
And that poem was called Entity from Plans. And that was my take on this weird legal concept called corporate personhood, which I still don't understand today. I don't understand how a Fortune 500 company can be conferred onto them the same rights as a person in the highest court in the country, while they're not recognizing our own individual or collective human rights.
Absolutely.
It boggles the fucking mind.
Please read on, my brother.
Not too long ago, I have like some anthologies come out, and here's about two of them. One was published by a publishing company called South Broadway Press in Denver, Colorado, called Dwell, Poems About Home. And this particular poem is like wine, deeply personal, and it is exactly that, deeply personal, minus the social commentary. This is from page 22 of Dwell, and it speaks to me as a person in real time and how I live. This is called Solitude. Lack of a lover, lack of children, lack of pets, lack of flatmates, lack of arguments starting out as petty, lack of partition space, lack of visitors unless they're invited. Just me in my little house, 2-room inner sanctum where I could be just me. Living situation I seem to be condemned to and somehow prefer. That poem was called Solitude. And I've lived in collective housing situations, and after the last great one that I've endured for 5 years, which was in a shitty 3-floor walk-up anarchist collective house and event space, I decided This ain't for me. I want my own place, just me living in it. And I finally have it in the small house in Oakland's East Side today, where I've lived for 8 years.
Bravo. Not an easy thing for an honest man.
No, it ain't. And I didn't like any of the folks that I lived with at all, maybe except for one person who was like the closest thing to a little sister. But the rest of them, I'd rather not have them back in my life ever again. And this came from another anthology that just was mailed to me on Friday. This came from a publisher in McAllen, Texas called Esperanza. And this is part of the Unfolded Poetry Project, this new anthology called Had I Known Before. And it's like a compendium of people's different regrets and whatnot and missteps toward life. I have 2 poems in the book. I'm only going to do one of them. And this one and the second one that's in the book are also deeply personal. This is about my experiences with the different subcultures I was a part of. But it's done up as an implied metaphor or deep image piece. This is called Had I Known. Nobody enjoys being somebody's target. However, I have lived within that role for so damn long, I cannot recall being anything else, least of all, loved. My search for acceptance had brought me to a carnival, shooting gallery. Every rifle's barrels were leveled in my direction. Had I known before that the underground was a big hideout for society's hypocrites and its numerous scattered tribes, repeated the mainstream's odious behaviors and attitudes, I would have dodged those blasted rounds, direct hits on their intended mark. All those raw wounds I carried, all that hypocrisy, all that judgment, all that shame, all that isolation, after the gun smoke dissipated. Nobody chooses to be somebody's sitting duck. But that position was thrust on me, living my best possible life. As an anarchist, a punk, a goth, a metalhead, whilst the hate kept on coming, one injurious round at a time, like walking a carnival, firing range. And that poem was called Had I Known, for pages 164 and to 166 of Had I Known Before.
We got time for 2 more, brother.
I think now is the time you could activate the screen share feature.
Okay, will do.
Let me step outside of myself for a moment and focus on little things that interest me or people. From Sage Cigarettes Magazine Online. This poem is called Gentleman Villain, and it's my attempt at the sonnet form, which is 14 lines, all rhyming. Gentleman Villain. St. Louis candy magnate's heir, Yale educated, Gilbert and Sullivan trained, Poe fascinated. Mercury Theater on the radio, screenway to the screen actor's game, but it was in castles and mansions of Gothic, horror films where he saw his greatest fame. Medieval Victorian gentleman villain, mad scientist type, those were the times. His gaze and voice together have chilled millions of spines. Manner smoother than satin, eyes colder than ice. Motion picture master of menace was he, Vincent Price.
Excellent, excellent.
And that poem was called Gentleman Villain, which was written in 2022 on Vincent Price's birthday. And he was one of my favorite old school horror movie actors of all time, American or otherwise.
Bravo, bravo.
And the last poem I'm going to do happens to come from Rabbit Oak number 30 online. And I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom to this poem here. The only hint I'll give you is I'm wearing them right now. This is called Beads. The only physical reminder I have of my grandmother, mixed African and Native American, is a string of colored beads. Crafted, strung together by her aged hands while sitting in bed, gifted to me at age 27. Her way of telling her Afro-punk grandboy, never forget your roots. Roots running deep in each tiny bead in Afrocentric primary colors. Blood of West African, Southeast North American tribes, red. Skin of the first people on earth responsible for first, black. Jungles, woodlands taken out of greed and conquest, green. Shining sun, restorer of biology and good vibes, yellow. Sole remnant of my beloved, of mixed heritage, handmade bridge between continents expropriated, a string of colored beads I label as nothing fancy, yet wore on special occasions with black for the black, recalls my grandmother's unspoken plea, never forget your roots. And that last poem was called Beads for Tricia De Jesus, BKA Finn Bell, who happens to host an open mic every Thursday called Fincabulary, and is a member of the Poetry Global Network from Rabbit Oak number 30.
Very nice. May I offer you one, brother?
Yeah, I like to hear what you got to bring.
I've got 3 books published so far, and I got one in the hopper. My first 2 were short story collections. I thought that those might be a little more commercially viable. My last book was a collection of my verse called 7370 Allen Drive. And the one coming up is called Stone Poetry. And
congratulations.
Thank you, brother. That's going to be published by my friend, or by our friend, Marissa Prada, with her.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you, brother. So I've got 2 I'd like to offer you. One I think is a COVID poem. We all learned a little something from the COVID experience.
Without a doubt.
And the other is a delightful little piece about a racial truth that I tried to explore. I was living in Miami, and as is still too friggin' common, police beat a man to death, and he happened to be black. And despite the fact that they usually get away with that stuff, it turned out that he was a middle-class black gentleman, and they couldn't cover it up. And what I heard, to my absolute sadness, and Miami's an interesting city. It's got so much intermingling that there's no hard and fast lines. But I still heard the same bullshit. This good, this bad. So I thought, why doesn't some anthropologist, why doesn't some behaviorist explain why it's common, but how it can be fixed? And hearing no other behaviorists address it, I thought I would do my little best to help out. So I wrote this. It's called A Behaviorist Perspective: The Causes of Racism. The troop, or group. The clan's glad hand, the sign of 9, the grip in the dark, the posted mark informs the stable state of norms, remembering the frames of membrane games. Brain disguises, shade your eyes in apple pies, it sizes the territory, the turf. Well, the good should. Our side of town, our group is right in the sight of good God's smile. Even sunlight reviles your kind outside the pure, to lure with your kind's lazy, stupid stunts. A sparrow of a different hue could be torn and clove in two by a few of another blue hunt. The strength, bounding, bonding, unicellular life in multicellular strife, responding, besiding, ties the atom so tight, minute molecular might, chooses in precise measure who you'll sleep with tonight. Beehives survived by tribes trance. The queen's romance excludes the rude outsider, protects the provider, determines the rider of the queen's desire. Emboldened invaders reduce the chance for the tribe to advance. Social groups and baboon troops in fishy schools know who the foe is, when to go, who's the friend, where's the end. The rules used, training fools by gene and team wish, that's culture's dish. It keeps the Portuguese man of war banging on the door. It explains to the colony who'd hang on to and why. Cultural clash, like red ants and black as a reason to attack, is a common step to keep 'em hep to good guys and bad. But isn't it sad how often these supportive social ties, the tools of molecular rules, conceal the lack and leak of the social contract to the greater stack? The organs of your hand would be foolish to war or inflict harm on the arm. Could the leg force the knee to submit or flee? Could the brow to the forehead say, drop dead, be gone, am scray, and then in confusion sway against the neighbor's array? As this is to make a fist to relate the cultural trait, a boundary in this or any country, take Humpty Dumpty. He's really something to relate to the ground with a loud cracking sound. Unicellular or multicellular, in clothing and in motion, you're expressing the notion of your tribe. It doesn't hide, it wouldn't try. But membranes even say, if you lean over easy this way, together is stronger, lives happier longer. Cultural rifts needn't cause tiffs or express fists in pain what it is when they mean the support of us. They needn't bleed trust or force us to muss the membrane's edgy thrust. But if you say it must, symbiosis is being, osmosis is meaning, surely you know this. There's no relief in grief. Let tribal libel cease. Extend the grace of space. The use of social bonding to unite is great. But even edges meet and act to attract the surging urge to merge. Behaviorist perspective. Thank you, brother.
Rick, it was deep, and it was also very important and socially conscious to hear. Did this particular police brutality case make it in the news?
It did. It did. In fact, the policemen were actually arrested. So
Whoa.
it was one of those rare times, man.
Nice. They finally got what was coming to them. I mean,
Yep.
did the dude survive or did he die or what?
No, he was killed. They killed him.
Damn.
Yeah.
My condolences to that dude and what his family might have felt.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Rick, I like to hear this other one that you got.
Okay. So here's my COVID poem for you. I thought that you had a wonderful COVID poem, so I offer you this. Down from the trees. Honey baby, tell me please, since we're really not that long down from the trees, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, up in the branches or down on deeply polished floors. We like reciprocal, you and me. Ever since we balanced on the limbs of trees, whether out in the car or up in the tree, I'll groom you and you groom me. The only thing now that's left for us when the virus sets a fence between what we really feel and what we really mean, with you so far away on the other side of the glowing screen another day, we wave weakly. How I miss your sweet perfume and the many ways, darling, you decorate a room. The distance Mars, our love sealed up behind the glass green walls, untouched. Oh, honey baby, tell me, please, since we're really not that long down from the trees, I wish you were here to find and pluck off all my fleas. We're isolated, out of touch. My fingers clutch in disarray, my clothes askew. What I wouldn't give for you to have your seat beside me here, with your fingers searching my matted hair. Even to have you look with scorn at the clothes piled across the room I've worn. I'd even eat the toast you burn if I could beside you touch you and warmly turn down from the trees.
That sounds
Listen,
bitter. Sounds bittersweet, and that I wish I had somebody that I could write something like that for. But love eludes some of us.
well, I wish you a lovely, charming woman soon, brother. Let's end
Thank
on
you.
one of yours, please.
Okay.
One more of
Well,
yours, sir.
okay. I'm going to do another one from Rusty Gallows, Passages Against Hate. And this one is going to be more on a positive tip, if I could find it real quick. This one seems to be a crowd favorite at every virtual open mic and in-person appearance that I go to. And I originally wrote this for the editor of an online magazine called the Journal of Expressive Writing. And Dane Ince had one piece in there at one time as well. I had two. And this was based on one of the editor's many prompts. From pages 77 and 78 of Rusty Gallows, this one is called Out Front. I am grateful for the arch roof above my head, the twin rafters with the twin lights holding it in place, the faux walls surrounding me, the two windows with the two Venetian blinds down and shut at all times, the red brick flow below my feet, the wooden shelves full of books and movies, the VHS by themselves and the DVDs in clear totes, the Keatsa mattress I sleep on, the melatonin that helps me sleep, the vegan food in my fridge, a meat-free zone, the fruit and vegetable juices I savor, the filtered water I drink more than tap shit, the hardcover journal notebooks and the roller point pens I use to express myself, the shower I use, even though I'm a bathtub man, the Hewlett-Packard laptop computer aiding creation of the once and future poetry volumes, the Samsung TV and VCR DVD player combo, the little house in East Oakland I call home, the vast collection of political slogan t-shirts. I wear the convictions of my heart on my chest. Sometimes antisocial, always anti-racist remains a personal favorite, but being Black is not a crime, gets me the most love on the street. But most of all, I am grateful for the bus drivers, the firefighters, the restaurant delivery drivers, the subway train conductors, the laundrette clerks, the grocery store workers, the farmers market workers, which I happen to be one, the doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, the pharmacy workers, the protesters for the rights of all Black lives, the dead and the living, the mutual aid collectives giving food, water, medicine, and household items to the people living hand to mouth during this goddamn pandemic and long before. All the heroes out front in our service, seeing to our medial survival needs. They could use the praise, and you don't need superpowers to be a hero. Just be there out front for us.
Wonderful, sir. Wonderful.
And that last poem was called Out Front for Jennifer A. Minotti, the editor of the Journal of Expressive Writing. And Out Front was one of two attempts that are in the book Rusty Gallows, which are done in a certain style called expressive writing, also called free writing, where you just sit there, write what you feel or know in the moment and not worry about proper grammar, proper spelling, proper diction, or punctuation. You just write what you feel on the spot. And Out Front was one of those pieces for me based on Miss Minotti's prompts.
Well, sir, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us. You are a special voice with such heart. It's an honor to chat with you, sir.
It's my pleasure, Mr. Spisak. My pleasure.
All right. Well, you take care and we'll talk to you soon, brother.
All right. You enjoy the rest of the Sunday, you hear?